Okay, so we come to chapter 14 now, and we find out a lot more about Mr. Evans, and Carrie and Nick leave Druids Bottom. Best to be in bed and out of the way before Mr. Evans came home. What would he do? What would he say? The thought of it scared them so much they turned all the lights out and went straight upstairs without even taking a candle, in case he came up and saw the light under their door. They undressed in the dark in gathering panic and fell into bed and closed their eyes tight and pretended to snore. He wouldn't wake them if he thought they were sleeping. Carrie thought she'd never be able to sleep, but she did, perhaps because she was pretending so hard, and she slept deeply, so deeply and dreamlessly that when she woke she couldn't think at first where she was, nor place the strange noise at the back of her head. Scrape, rattle, like rats scrabbling the other side of the wall. No, not rats. She woke fully, and knew that Mr. Evans was home and riddling the fire. The noise always travelled like that up the chimney. She lay still, quaking a little to start with at the thought of him sitting down there, angrily riddling the fire as if he were punishing it because his sister had left him, and then she began to feel angry herself. She thought of all the wicked things he'd done, and her anger grew and grew like a dark flower opening inside her. She'd been sorry for him, and he'd cheated her. He'd given her a ring that didn't belong to him, a ring he'd stolen as he'd stolen Mr. Johnny's safety and Hepzibah's happiness when he'd stolen the will. There was nothing she could do about that, but she could give him the ring back. And that would show what she thought of him. Albert had said she was brave. Well, she would do a brave thing for once. She would go straight downstairs right now this minute and throw the ring back in his face. She flew out of bed, out of the room, across the landing, down the stairs, treading as heavily as she could and wishing she had hobnail boots on instead of bare feet. That would teach him. That would wear out his carpet. A great wind of rage seemed to blow her along the passage, flung the doors open, and then dropped her, becalmed just inside it. She breathed hard but said nothing. Mr. Evans was sitting there staring at the dead fire, the poker in his hand. He looked up at her and saw her and said in a puzzled voice, "Bit early, isn't it?" She said, "Late, you mean, don't you?" and looked at the clock on the mantelpiece. It was 5:30 in the morning. Mr. Evans said, "I was just going to wake you. Train goes at 7." He stood up, his bones creaking, and went to the kitchen window to take the blackout frame down. Light poured in and the sound of birds singing. Carrie said, "You been up all night?" He nodded. He took the kettle from its hook above the fire and filled it at the sink. He hung it back in its place, then knelt to put screwed up newspaper and kindling in the grate. When it flared up, he put the coal on, small lump by small lump, as Auntie Lou always did, and as Carrie watched him doing Auntie Lou's job, all the anger went out of her. He said, "Soon get it going. Cup of tea, bit of breakfast. Bacon, I thought. Fried bread and tomatoes. Something hot to set you up for the journey." Carrie said in a small voice, "Not for Nick. The grease might upset him. He gets sick on trains." "Porridge, then." He looked round rather helplessly. "I can do that," Carrie said. She took the double saucepan from the rack and the packet of oats from the cupboard and busied herself, not looking at him. She could feel him looking at her, his eyes on the back of her neck. But when she turned round, he was laying the table. She said breathlessly, "Auntie Lou." "Gone. Off with her fancy man. Did you know?" She bit her lip till it hurt. "Nick did. I didn't." He grunted, dropped a spoon, and bent to pick it up. "She's made her own bed. Much good may it do her." Carrie said, "Are you are you angry?" He sucked his teeth thoughtfully. "Ate a lot, your Auntie Lou did. Always at it, munch, munch, nibble, nibble, just like a rabbit. Now she's gone, there'll be one less mouth to feed, one less mouth to eat up the profits. Fred will feel the benefit when he comes to take over the business." Carrie thought of Fred standing in the hayfield, standing there and scowling and telling Mrs. Gotobed that he wasn't coming back after the war, that he wasn't going into the shop. Mr. Evans said, "Told the boy, did she? Why couldn't she tell me then, face to face, instead of stealing away like a thief in the night, just leaving a note? That does rile me a bit." "Perhaps she was scared of what you might say," Carrie suggested, and he snorted contemptuously. "Scared? What's she got to be scared of me for? No, to make me look small, that's her object, just like her fine sister Dillis. The two of them make a right pair, sending messages, leaving notes. You look at this now." He turned to the mantelpiece, took a brown envelope from behind the clock and shook something out onto the table. "An old photograph," he said. "That's all I had from Dilys on her deathbed, and not even sent to me neither. I had to find it going through her things and making a record as her grand London lawyer instructed me." The photograph was brown and curling at the edges. It was a picture of a girl wearing a frilly bonnet and long frilly drawers that reached down below her dress to her ankles. She was sitting in a chair, her feet on a footstool, and a boy in a sailor suit stood beside her. Both children had high, bony foreheads and pale, bulgy eyes. Carrie said, Is that you and Mrs. Gotobed then?" He nodded and chewed at the side of his thumb. "I'd be 10 years about, Dilys a bit older." Carrie stretched her mind to imagine Mr. Evans being so young, younger than she was now, younger than Nick. He said, 45 years ago. Long time you'll be thinking it. Only other picture I've got of her I keep in my watch." He took his old-fashioned fob watch out of his waistcoat pocket and clicked the back open. The girl in the photograph smiled out, rather older now, her hair in a bun, one hand touching her cheek. Mr. Evans said, "See that ring she's got on? That's the one you've got now. I bought it for her, see, with my first wages, and when she gave it back I gave it to you. So there's a bit of old history you got with that ring." Carrie swallowed hard. "When she gave it back?" "Don't parrot, girl, you heard me. It was with the picture. No letter, nothing, just my name on the envelope tucked away in her jewel box." "Nothing else at all?" It was hard to ask, but she had to make sure. "What else should there be?" He looked suspiciously at her. "What are you grinning for?" "I'm just glad," Carrie said, and she was. Glad to know he wasn't a bad man, not a thief after all. But she could hardly tell him that. She said, "I'm glad she sent them back, the ring and the picture. It meant she remembered, didn't it, that she'd thought of you?" "Seemed more like a slap in the face to me," he said. "But take it your way if you like. Now you get upstairs double quick and wake up that idle young brother of yours, or you'll be missing your train." He came to the station and saw them into the carriage. He said, "You'll be all right now. No point in my waiting." He didn't kiss them good-bye, but he touched Carrie's cheek and ruffled Nick's hair. "Young Nicodemus," he said, and turned on his heel. "Well, that's over," Nick said, and sat back. "Don't be mean," Carrie said. "He was quite nice at the end." "Nice?" Nick rolled his eyes upward. "Not so bad then." She wished she could tell him that Mr. Evans hadn't stolen the will after all, but Nick had never thought that he had, so there was no point in it, and there was no chance to tell Albert. She'd half hoped he would be at the station, but there was no sign of him. She said, "I wonder if Albert will be waving up at the line. I would if I was him." "This time of the morning," Nick said. Carrie sighed. "We can wave to the house, though," Nick said. "There's a place where you can see it after the bend." "I shan't look," Carrie said. "I don't think I can bear it." She leaned back and closed her eyes. She felt tired already, though the day had hardly begun. Nick said, "When can we open our lunch packet, Carrie? My stomach's flapping." She ignored that remark. She sat, pretending to sleep. She decided to keep her eyes closed all the way to the junction, and when the train started she wished she could close her ears too, because Nick stood at the window and sang, "Goodbye town, goodbye, goodbye War Memorial, goodbye square, goodbye chapel on Sundays, goodbye old slag heap." Carrie thought, "My heart's breaking." "Goodbye mountains, goodbye trees," Nick chanted as the train gathered speed. Carrie felt she couldn't bear to hear that light, cheerful voice sing out, "Goodbye Druids Bottom." She jumped up and thrust him down on the seat, holding his shoulders. He said, squirming, "Let me go, Carrie, let me go, rotten beast." And she laughed and released him and turned to the window and screamed. The train whistle blew at the same moment, and her scream was drowned in it. Nick only saw her dark, open mouth and her eyes shocked and staring. He stumbled up and she clung to him. The train whistled once more and shot into the tunnel. Nick felt Carrie shaking and shuddering. The train joggled and they fell on the seat, clasped together. She said in the dark, in the tunnel, "It's on fire, Nick! Druids Bottom on fire! Blazing away, flames and smoke! They'll all be dead, Nick!" She started to cry. She said between sobs that seemed to tear her chest open something that sounded like, "All my fault." He knew it couldn't be that, because it didn't make sense, but there was no point in asking her what she'd said, because she was crying too hard. She cried, and Nick sat and watched. He didn't know how to stop her, and when she did stop by herself, when they got to the junction and had to change trains, he was afraid to say anything in case she started again, and so he said nothing. Neither then nor later. Carrie never mentioned Druids Bottom after that day, not to him, not to their mother, and because she'd frightened him so badly, crying like that, neither did he. So there you go. Now you know what happened to Druids Bottom and what Mr. Evans was really like.